Welcome to Current Conversations, a podcast imagined by Rivers Are Life and Be Alive, where we discuss freshwater systems, the important role that rivers and watersheds play in our world, and how educating conservationists leads to a healthier planet. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode, Artists as Advocates, and being part of a ripple of action that is creating change. I'm Ariel Roth, co-host of Current Conversations and Rivers Are Life community manager.
And I'm Julia Rajewski, Impact Manager at Rivers Are Life and Current Conversations co-host. Today's guest is John Sabraw. John is a professor of art at Ohio University, where he chairs the painting and drawing and digital art and technology programs. He's also a board advisor at Scribble Art Workshop in New York. He has most recently been featured in TED, Smithsonian, New Scientist, London, Great Big Stories, Business Insider, and Time.
One of John's current collaborations is showcased in our short film, Toxic Art. The project involves creating paint and paintings from iron oxide extracted in the process of remediating polluted streams. This film has really hit close to home for me as an artist who has also tied my engineering background into my art practices, as John has really combined his chemistry background with his process of creating pigments in art. Let's get into today's episode.
Would you tell us about yourself? In general, your life story.
The Cliff Notes version.
Yes, please.
Who are you, John?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Wow. I feel like I should pay you all to figure that out for me. I'm a mistake-prone screw-up who ended up in a really good group of people. That's what I am. I grew up military kid, father's in the Air Force. So I was born in England. When I was young, we lived on different military bases, came back from England when I was like 3 or something. So I lost the accent. From there, family strife, ended up living with my mother and my sisters in Kansas. Absolutely not a single note of anything special through all of my high school years or elementary schools. There's no shining moment of any kind of thing. I wasn't headed to college, and I had no idea that there was a future of any kind out there for me at all whatsoever. I really wasn't living much in the home towards the end of high school. But this is like the wackiest story ever. Is I was really my usual stupid high school self, and I threw all of my artwork out in a trash can in art class one day. Just scooped it all up, piled the papers on top of one another, just threw it out in the can. And then I didn't go to school for a week because, who cares? I wasn't going anywhere anyway. While I was gone that week, my teacher, Pat Nemchok, pulled those drawings out of the trash can, and the jurors for the state congressional art competition or whatever it is came through, and I won first place for the state of Kansas.
Wow.
Huh.
And I was like, what? And so at that point, obviously we were very late in the game, and I was headed towards maybe, I don't know, trying to be an assistant manager of a 7-Eleven as a peak in life somewhere. And she helped me put together a portfolio, slides and everything else, and apply to different art schools. And I got into Pride Institute in Brooklyn. I'd never been to a big city or anything else like that. And so I bought a one-way ticket. And I moved to Brooklyn at 17. I only did the 2-year program, and it was an associate's degree in illustration. I didn't know what art was, by the way. It was just, I wanted to do a cool enough album cover that Led Zeppelin would get back together. I figured if I could design something so good, they'd be like, yes.
They'd have to. Yeah.
Together. Right? Yeah. I mean, this is us. Look at this artwork. Oh my gosh. We didn't know. Let's get back together, guys. It's great. And then at the end of my 2-year program there, the last semester, we had a class that was like, I can't remember the class specifically, but we had a guest in one of the classes who was Peter Jackson, and he was an editor at Orchard's Books, which is they publish children's books. And he talked to us about the whole process about making a dummy for a children's book of illustrations and blah, blah, blah and stuff. And I made a dummy and wrote a little manuscript with it. And I sent it to him. And he called me the next day. And he offered me a contract to do the children's book.
That's so cool.
Which is like, yeah, I know, right? No, me too. I was like, what? Oh, now I got to do it. It was cool. So they gave me this super small advance, and I was like, yeah. And I moved to Greenpoint, Brooklyn with my buddy Chris. So I did this children's book, and then the advance ran out before the book was published, of course. I had to get a job. So I got a job designing ladies' handbags on 5th Avenue and 33rd Street, of which I knew nothing about. I got the job because in the Village Voice, there was an ad for a sketcher. And I went in to interview for Sketcher, and they put me in a conference table in this office, and they gave me a piece of white Xerox paper and a blue ballpoint pen, and they put a purse in front of me, and they said, draw the purse, we'll be back. And I just drew the purse, and they came back and they said, you're hired.
It's quite an interview.
It was a great interview. I didn't know I didn't know anything about handbags, or anything about fashion or anything else. So that was just a short gig. Had a lot of other crazy jobs, working at auction houses, another handbag company, like you name it, I did it to survive. And I tried to be in advertising business. Went out to Minneapolis for a couple of weeks with a remote relative to try to make that work. It's terrible at that, didn't know anything. And my children's book got published, and then I started doing a couple of like talks, and some of them were at bookstores, which was, I would say, poorly attended, but it really is like no attendance whatsoever, because who knows me, I'm nobody. Yeah. But some elementary schools really wanted me to come and talk, and I did some talks in classrooms, and I was like, I made a children's book, and I was like 20 years old at that time. One time I went out to New Jersey to this school, and I thought I was just talking to a classroom full of kids, and it was the whole school, kindergarten through sixth grade. And I was like, it was like I think they took the gymnasium over, if I remember right, and it was like just filled the whole floor, not on bleachers or something, just the whole floor, row after row of kids, from like little tiny tots in front to like sixth graders in the back. And I was like, I didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, oh. So I had them bring me like a giant pad of paper and some markers, and I just ran around the kids, asking them to yell out crazy ideas for characters, and then I would just draw the characters in marker on the pad, and we kind of made a children's book there, whatever. But then actually, I decided, that I wasn't going to do one of those again. And then I got this box of letters from those kids in the mail, and they had drawn their own books and characters and written me notes and everything. It was a box. It was full of like, I don't know, dozens of these things. And I was like, that's the first time I thought maybe teaching was going to be, a part of my creative life, which was cool. Now we're up to 15 in terms of the years. And then after that, basically like nothing was working out whatsoever. And I went home to visit family, and I met this guy who's a professor, and his paintings were like amazing, like just stunning. I didn't know like living people could paint like the old masters. It was like, amazing. And so at that point I decided that's what I wanted to do. And I bought a car for $500, and I lived out of it for 40 days and 40 nights, driving around the American West, putting 11,000 miles on the car. Head cleared. The whole time I had my girlfriend's picture on the dashboard, and came back and we got married. That was 32 years ago. And then from there, basically I went through undergrad as an old man at 23 or something like that. Got into master's in Northwestern. And from there, it was a long, strange ride, becoming an artist and becoming a professor. And I can bore you with those stories some other time. But in my last senior year, and while I was at Northwestern doing my master's degree, I was really, really, really interested in old masters, and really, really interested in chemistry, in how they made their pigments, how they made their paints, what the heck was going on back then. Because at that point, there had been a new study of Rembrandt paintings coming out that had really gone into super detail with like all these tiny, tiny microscopic images and chemical breakdowns and everything. So I used to teach that then when I was at Northwestern, and sometimes as a guest at School of Art Institute of Chicago, I would teach history of pigment, chemicals, and makeup of pigments and all that kind of stuff for paints, which is really cool. And then I got a job at Washington University teaching there, which was great. But then our daughter was school aged, and I was like, we couldn't find anything there. I mean, I was on a very, very low salary. So got this job at Ohio University. And when I came here, that's when I really started pushing sustainability, and met up with Guy Riefler, and then we started doing what we're doing now.
Nice. So I'm going to lead into that. First off, I like to listen to artist stories like that. So my background is engineering, but I really work well in the creative realm, and I'm a photographer, and I do pottery and ceramics and all of that as well. And I do love it because of my engineering background, like working with 3D mediums, how can I pose people, stuff like that. And I think it comes back to that, same with you talking about chemistry. So super interesting. I like to hear those stories. But for listeners who maybe haven't watched your film Toxic Art, we do talk about how you're taking iron oxide and turning it into pigments with True Pigments, those 3 reclaimed ones. Can you talk about that project? Because it is really a super cool, interesting project.
Yeah, this project is my entire, sort of senior professional career. This is now, Professor Riefler and I we've always been trying to remember when we first had coffee to talk about this project, and we believe it was 2009 or 2010. We literally can't remember. But essentially, I had finished a very large scale project working with some astrophysicists who are amazing people. And it was a very large scale art project involving the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, and that was at the museum here at the Kennedy Museum of Art at Ohio University. We got a lot of dialogue out of that, which was great, but I didn't feel that I was making any kind of real impact. I didn't feel that I was changing much in the world that was going to create a better future environment for my daughter to grow up in, right? And for me to grow old in. And so that's when I began investigating more about what I could do in terms of sustainability. Part of that was joining a very small cohort of faculty that were being educated by another super cool group of faculty from the environmental studies degree here, where they were taking us around to southeastern Ohio here and educating us about the ecosystem here. One of those days, they took us to an acid mine seep. And that's the first time, I'm not from Ohio, obviously. And so that's the first time I had ever seen this or heard of it or something else. And when you're walking up to it, you smell it before you see it because there's a high sulfur content. And so you smell this thing and you're like, well, something's gone wrong over here. What's going on? And then you come down to the creek or the river and they are absolutely bright orange. It is really crazy. Like your mind, it takes a minute for your mind to go, am I seeing things? Am I off today? Did I have too many Fruit Loops for breakfast? What's happening? Right. And then you see it and it's just miles and miles of streams that have no aquatic life in it, don't really have insects, things around it are turning black, all the plants and everything. And they were like, yeah, this is acid mine drainage. It's this pollution that happens because when abandoned coal mines are improperly sealed, they fill up with water. And since when you're extracting from the underground mines, when you're extracting that coal, you expose rock surfaces, right, that have been buried for 300 million years. And here in this particular region, those rock walls contain a lot of sulfur in the form of pyrite, and that's also iron. So when that water hits it with oxygen and things, it starts to dissolve that. The sulfur comes into it. That turns into sulfuric acid, which dissolves even more. And basically, you end up with this incredibly densely iron-laden acidic water that eventually fills up and finds its way out. And when it hits those creeks, more oxygen hits those dissolved iron particles, and those become iron oxyhydroxide, I believe is the correct one. But you're the chemistry. You should probably know, right? Engineering?
Not chemistry.
You're ceramic.
Mechanical engineering. But I do know iron oxide because we just had to pick clays. I do a pottery class every semester. And I picked a red speckled clay this semester around. And they talked about iron oxide. And I was like, oh, I know all about that. Because of the film.
Yeah. I mean, ceramics, you got to know your chemistry as a ceramicist. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. That is a home base for you. That'd be really fun.
We just talked about that too, because we aren't allowed to bring our own clay in. Like, we have to purchase it from where I take my classes at. And it is because people have tried to bring in clay because they're like, yeah, it's a high fire clay type. And then it melts and it'll ruin all of it because there is so much chemistry that goes into it. Yeah.
Or explode. Yeah. From all of my fascination with, alchemy and with the old masters and how they made pigments and the history of pigments and the chemical makeup of them, when they were like, yeah, all this orange sludge here, this is iron oxide. I was like, wait, what? I don't know about iron oxide. And so I was like, can I make paints out of these, do you think? And like, everybody's like, oh, we don't know, you're crazy. And so I took a jar back to the studio and didn't succeed at all. Made absolute horrible mud. Just it wouldn't bind, it wouldn't be smooth. It would just make concrete chunks of like mud. So it was terrible. I was like, wow, gosh, I don't know if this ever can work. I mean, I thought I had a good idea, but maybe not. And then it was like, it wasn't long after that when one of my friends, Elaine Getz, she was getting her PhD studying under Professor Guy Riefler. She said that her professor, who I didn't know at the time, needed an artist's help with a project he was working on. And I said, yeah, hook me up. We had coffee and he was like, yeah, I'm trying to get this iron oxide sludge to turn. I was like, wait, the stuff in the creeks? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, and he's like, it wasn't having much luck with it. And I was like, well, me neither. And he's like, well, let's make it happen. I was like, yeah, let's do it, And that was again, 2009, 2010. So for those first couple of years, we could make some pigments, and they were not tasty, and we can make some paints and they were not delicious to work with. But over years and years of refining it and asking much harder questions, we've gotten to a place where now that actually is really, really good looking pigment. It makes a great paint. You wouldn't notice any difference between our pigments and paints with any professional artist grade on the market anywhere. And now what we're hoping to do we're in the middle of the process, actually, of designing a full-scale treatment plant at Truetown, Ohio. And Truetown, Ohio is the #1 priority acid mine pollution seep in the state because it releases over 1 million gallons of acid mine drainage pollution every single day into Sunday Creek. And that's about 6,000 to 7,000 pounds of iron every single day. So that kills the next 7 miles of Sunday Creek. Yeah. So our plant is going to intercept 100% of that pollution. It's going to treat it. In that process, it's going to create 6,000 to 7,000 pounds of sustainably sourced iron oxide pigment that we can sell on the market. The sale of that pigment will generate income that will pay for the operation of the plant, generating a few jobs, and we hope to generate enough of a profit that we can actually use the profit to go clean up other streams in the area. And that's where we're at right now.
Nice.
That's an incredible project.
Yeah, it really is.
That's wild. It's all, and I want to come back to a word you used, that word, alchemy. I am not an artist. I like to pretend I am. I like doodle in the corners of my notes.
Everyone is. I think that's the beautiful part of art. Yeah. Even when you talk about, John, about not knowing anything about it, none of us do. We just figure out our own style. So
Y'all
you are.
Definitely know a lot more. And I wanted to ask, I mean, obviously this is a very chemical process. It's a very complicated process. But for those of us who maybe don't know about that as much, what are some of the changes this has inspired you to take within your own life and even in your own artwork? Like, what has this made you want to express personally as part of your story?
That's a really deep question there.
Yeah, sorry.
We're getting personal.
I know.
And this is a 4-hour podcast, right?
Yeah,
it's difficult to answer that question succinctly because the project has gone for such a long time. I've evolved and my artwork has evolved, and how I intersect with culture and politics and society and educational system, all of that has evolved as this has gone on, right? So initially my thought was, well, I just started experimenting with some abstract paintings. I was a hyper-realist painter. Like everything was very like no brush strokes, hyper-realistic. Again, my love of old masters, I had all these little old master paintings I was making and did very well with those for about 10 years. But I was reaching a kind of I'm not sure it's a crisis. Well, let's just call it a mid-art life crisis. How about that? And so I was trying to do a certain thing and it wasn't working out at all. So I ended up having a very, a very frustrating time in the studio. And I ended up migrating into this kind of abstract space, which I felt very terrified of. I was like, no, I'm not an abstract artist. I don't know what this is, you know? And that was right about the time that I started partnering with Professor Riefler. And so those first pigments gave me an entry point into the conversation that I felt I needed to have, but wasn't sophisticated enough to have it yet. And it gave me that entry point to be like, well, it is about sustainability. It is about collaborating with other humans and having this really good synergy so that we can, you know, innovate and move forward and build a much better future. But it didn't have to be didactic. It didn't have to be one-to-one relationship where it was like, here is a symbol. Here's what the symbol means. It could be something that was more dynamic, that was contemplative. And I was absolutely terrified. My first body of work of this stuff was in late 2010. I had a solo exhibition in Chicago at my dealer, Tom McCormick. And he was, he was a little surprised that his realist painter brought in round abstract paintings for a show when we'd been showing together for so long. For 10 years, we've been showing, 11 years, I think. Yeah, 11 years we've been showing. He was like, what are these? What are these abstract things? And so I was like, oh no, please, nobody come to the opening. This is going to be the worst day of my art life. It's terrible. But the opposite happened. People actually came to the show and they were walking around and they all independently in different ways would come to me, and somehow in the abstraction and in the mixing of our acid mine drainage pigments and regular artist pigments and other things, it called up in them some kind of memory, and they were different for each one, that was about their experience with nature in some way. Some people it was vacations to like Niagara Falls. Some people it was growing up, you know, in the fields, whatever else. And each one of them, for some reason, it just reached this part of them that just called up this personal memory. And I was fascinated. And what happens when that happens, when that sort of encounter occurs, is immediately the kind of defense process is against someone preaching to someone about like, you've got to do this and you've got to change and this is what we need to do. That goes away, and you're sharing one-to-one as individuals this love of nature and this understanding of where that resides within us, right? Within our core as conscious beings in this universe. I was blown away. It took a while for me to process that and begin making the work again, right? So that was the beginning of it. And then gradually, as the artwork got more attention and as the project got more attention, then I began to get invitations to go and talk to people about things. And initially, I was just talking about the artwork and like, yeah, we're doing this project, but here's my artwork. And more people wanted to know, how are an artist and a scientist working together? How is an engineer, right, and an artist getting along at the same table? What's happening? And so I had to be like, strangely, I had to sort of study how to talk about this because I'm just, I'm not that kind of guy. And I was like, turns out somehow I actually, because I've just done it naturally, and because Guy is he's such a mellow, accepting, like funny dude that it was just natural and easy. It wasn't something where there was a lot of like tension or anything else. So it gave me an opportunity to start talking about art and creativity as an impulse that has a role to play when you mix it with trying to create innovative solutions to issues of our time. And that's something that continues to this day, where I'm asked to speak about that. How can we collaborate? What is the artist's role within this? How does all this fit within our culture and within shaping our future? And, I was terrified to talk about it initially, but now I'm really excited to talk about it. So that has also been reflected in the artwork that I make and in the projects that I do. So like right now we have this project that we just implemented in the spring and learned how to do it better. Let's put it that way. And now with this solo exhibition I have coming up in the spring of 2025 at the Canton Museum of Art, I have a team of 9 graduate students, and partnering with my collaborator on the project, Professor Basil Masrizada. And what we're doing is we actually bring students, whether they're young or 8 years old or 80 years old, who knows? We bring them out to a habitat, a local habitat that's important to their psychogeography. And we have some expert there introduce them to the complexities in the ecosystem and the joy of it. So sometimes that's us going out to the seep and going, this is horrible, right? Look at it. And then discussing like, but look at here's things that are alive. Here's what used to live in there. We want to restore it, all those kinds of things. Particularly, we focus on waterways more than anything else. And then what we do is we take that information, they go back and they create inhabitants. These kind of like, if you want to think of them as creatures, creative objects that could be referential, that could be abstract or anything, that they want to represent them living in that habitat. And so they take these inhabitants, we put them in the habitat with environmental sensors. And it's really wild stuff. Like someone made like a trailer home and someone made like a giant octopus, fun stuff. The kids love it. And then they get to see their creatures living in this habitat for a while, collecting data. And then we take that data, and the students take the data, and they can use AI software or other tools, and they create artwork that reflects data that was gathered from the seep. So you have this kind of full circle. And what we discovered in this process is that, you say you just sketch in the corners of things, right, Julie?
Yep.
I love it. Do more of it. Do it all the time.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Because all of us have that creative impulse. And to whatever degree we allow it to express. But when citizens, whether they're young or whether they're old, when they're validated in their instincts of creativity, and that in turn results in something that has measurable data about their local habitat, now you get advocates. Now you get people who are ready to speak up, feel that they have ownership of who they are, and that their instincts, whether they're creative, whether they're scientific, whatever they are, that those instincts are useful to society at large. And that's what we're trying to implement right now. I'm working with my school in New York, Scribble Art Workshop. We teach a very specific kind of creativity in over 40 public schools in the New York school system right now. And what we're trying to do is implement this as something where we can have creatures from the students in the Hudson River, right? In the East River, in ponds in Central Park, where we can really make people aware that they are valuable and they have a right to be in their local habitat, and that it's going to be something that's really life affirming for them to know more about that local habitat. I don't know. What was your question, Julia?
I do think that's huge. And I think we forget about how much those aspects connect all of us, even talking about the engineer and the art. Like, it's just a common ground for all of us if we find that one item that connects us, and all of us live in nature. At the end of the day, it's part of all of our day-to-day lives. And so it is finding that. And everyone can understand it. We can all understand a leaf falling or the rain or like the water running and how that sound makes us feel. So I love your art and I love the abstract. I have one of your limited run prints in my bedroom and I get compliments on it all the time. We also have an incredible piece here at the office. And we sell limited runs of those prints on our website, Rivers Are Life. But if someone wanted to support you elsewhere or grab your artwork or follow you, where would they do that at?
Yeah, I'm the best way to follow what I'm doing is on Instagram, at John_Sabraw. That's the best way to follow it. But also you can go to Ohio University. We have set up a fund here, and the fund is called the John Sabraw Fund for Art and Innovation. Since Ohio University is a public university, a state university, if you donate to that fund, it's actually tax deductible. Check with your accountants. It's tax deductible. And all of that money, what we do with it, and Gamblin has been very supportive in donating into that fund, Gamblin Artist Colors, is we use that to fund students. Sometimes we need just labor to come help down in the creek, do a cleanup, gather pigments, process it, whatever else, and we'll pay them hourly to do that. A lot of it, what we do is we give students full semester support through stipends and things like that so they can live and so they can work on the project during that time instead of, say, working in a fast food place or something else to, make rent or something else, which is great. And then sometimes there's, of course, expenses associated with, running the project. But that's something that you can do as well.
Yeah, and purchasing one of the limited run prints on our site, also a portion of those proceeds go back to support that foundation as well for any
exactly
listener.
Correct.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for sharing this space with us and sharing your story and everything and being on this season of Current Conversations with us.
Yeah, we're so grateful for not only your work, but the chance to let us help share your work and amplify it. We're so happy to know you and be able to chat with you today.
No, y'all are a little bit too easy to talk to, so thanks for putting up with a rambling old bastard who had too much coffee this morning.
Our pleasure.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Thanks, John. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah,
Bye.
talk to y'all. Have a good one.
Bye.